First, I'm going to ask Amanda to tell us, what do you love the best about your work?
So first, it is wonderful to be here. And I think you encapsulated one of the things I love the most about this work. It's bringing folks together to really figure out what we can draw from the work happening on the ground with students, to make big macro level policy impact so that students in the future don't have to have those same obstacles. Like, how can we make our society and even just our post-secondary education system more equitable and just for students? And so that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think a lot of us get that's what gets us out of bed too. And we all do that in different ways. So you are the lead on something called Degrees When Due. And this is not the first time we've talked about Degrees When Due in this work, but it is the first time we've connected since like the sort of the work has been capstoned, if you will, or this phase of the work has been closed. So could you just talk a little bit about what the inspiration was for Degrees When Due?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give a high level, like one-liner on Degrees When Due for anyone who may not be familiar, it was a nationwide initiative led by IHEP to help states and institutions re-engage stopped-out students and develop, think through, implement equitable practices that help students across that finish line. And Degrees When Due didn't start from scratch. It was really based in two multi-state degree reclamation initiatives. So the first was Project Win-Win, which was something that IHEP led, and Credit When It's Due, which was an initiative out of the Office of Community College Research and Leadership at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And each of them took a slightly different approach to this idea of degree reclamation, things like reverse transfer, re-engaging the some college no degree population, and each offered some key lessons that we thought when you bring them together that it could have a huge impact. So that was really the inspiration for the Degrees When Due initiative.
Thanks. And I think we've got a map that Misty can put up here for a minute just to talk a little bit. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how many institutions were involved, sort of what it entailed? I think that's our map, right? Yes.
Yes. So we had nearly 200 institutions in 23 states. So that included 117 two-year institutions and 82 four-year institutions. And as you can see, it represents a variety of states, regions, urbanicity, institution designations, and they participated across 3 years in 3 cohorts.
Great. Great. Thank you. Misty, you could probably take that down now. We'll of course share that with everybody. And then just like before we jump into how you approach the work, this is not this audience, while we've got some of our partners from higher ed here, is really a practitioner, institution neutral, if you will, practitioners who are sitting outside of institutions. How does it connect? How does this work connect to our audience?
So I think we have really similar goals and like a similar guiding star, if you will, that our goal was to re-engage students and help them complete. Because we know the power of a post-secondary education. And so we really focused on how to support institutions in figuring out what barriers existed to get students through to completion and meet students where they are. And I think there's a lot of synergy and overlap with the great work that you all do and the work pushed by Degrees When Due.
Great. So speaking of work, what exactly was the work?
Yes. So Degrees When Due really had 4 goals. So first was to increase post-secondary attainment, promoting equity in higher ed, building institutional capacity to support students, and establishing sustainable policies and practices to continue to serve students even after the Degrees When Due initiative wrapped up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really focused on a couple of strategies, things like identifying and re-enrolling near completers, identifying and removing, which is the important part, barriers to help better support students along their full pathway to completion, and then re-engaging adult students who had started but stopped out and helping to get them across the finish line. And so many of the lessons that we learned and that the institutions who participated learned will support students, not only that they're trying to re-engage, but those who are already in the doors now. It's helping to create an environment that is student ready, student friendly, and in particular helps to put a specific spotlight and focus on the adult student population.
Well, actually, speaking of that, right? So imagine if every college had a place where policy, practice, inquiry, and applied research are integrated, right, to foster innovation in educational attainment and the reduction of equity gaps, which we'll get to in a second, with a spotlight on changing dynamics of the communities they serve. I mean, that would be super cool. Well, we're going to bring on, I'm going to invite Kate Mahar to the stage. Because Kate is the founding executive director of a center that does just that at Shasta College in California, and also serves as the dean, because that's not enough. She serves also as the dean of innovation and strategic initiatives at the college and across the country, has worked for over 2 decades to improve the education pipeline for underrepresented students and communities. And as much as I would love to take a deep dive into everything she's done and learned, I am just delighted that Kate took some time out of her schedule today to discuss her work with Degrees When Due and also how it's played out at Shasta College, which is what we're really excited about. So Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. What an incredible group of folks on this call. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, thank you. It is an honor. It is an honor to have you. Amanda just talked globally about when Degrees When Due, and we're going to dive really into specifics about how that plays out nationally and how that played out within your institution. But I'm curious about, we looked at that map, and certainly there are a lot, close to 200 institutions that engaged and a lot of players. But I mean, I don't know how many higher eds there are across the country. I should know this, but there are thousands. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, like, what is in it for the institution? Because clearly not everybody was playing in this space, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's such a great question. And I'll always start with, it's really the right thing to do, as everyone on this call knows. And we have a unique situation. I work at Shasta College in far Northern California. We're the only public post-secondary in 10,000 square miles. And because of those demographics, we've always sort of seen our role differently. In fact, our president always says, you can tell the health of the college by the health of the community. So we've always had a real commitment to try to play a significant role in our region. And what actually was interesting, it came out of public health. Originally, a massive study on wellness in California, where our counties were at the bottom on so many indicators, and then the link between public health and education was really what started this conversation of how we needed to think about what we did differently, the direct correlation between wellness and education. So we started thinking about education as a lever, not only education for education's sake, but what that means for individual, community, and health. So we are having those conversations when we started working differently in the community, and then partnering with Lumina Foundation. They were the ones that came in and said, do you know that 1 out of 3 adults in your region have some college but no degree? So nationally, statewide is 1 of 5, but 1 out of 3 started and didn't finish in our region. And that was such an eye opener. So we knew if we were going to move the needle, that was a great place to start. So right thing to do, but also a very significant enrollment strategy. Let's not pretend that we don't also have to worry about, getting folks in the door. So depending on the higher ed institution that you're working with, those are 2 different value propositions that I know you're constantly juggling. So we were working on these issues. We heard about Degrees When Due. We recognized what a need that was going to be to try to figure out not only how to serve those folks that started that didn't finish, but really to be able to do a examination of why were we losing so many folks. So it was a perfect timing and perfect opportunity. And I remember when I first was sitting in a meeting here about Degrees When Due, it was was Julie at the time, and I basically followed around the rest of the meeting going, pick us, pick us, pick us, pick us. So Shasta College actually got to be part of the first cohort of Degrees When Due, and very, very grateful.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. So before we're going to start to move into sort of a lightning round of questions. And I realized I said when Kate and Amanda and I were talking yesterday, I said, we always plan tight, but hang loose, because I always make a mistake or something always goes wrong. And one of the things I forgot to do was to say, if you've got a pen, piece of paper, please make note of your questions. We're delighted to see them in chat, but we have a way to document them when we get to the end. So if you can just keep a note of them, I'll try to peek at chat, but I'm mostly looking at our speakers. So want to make sure that if you've got a burning question when we get to the end, we can at least acknowledge it. And Kate, you have other fans. I did notice that Jenny Murphy talked about how wonderful you are. Welcome,
Jenny's
Jenny.
so funny. Jenny is such a force in our community, and half of what we've done is because Jenny's like, hey, here's an idea, come play with us. So thanks,
So
Jenny.
great. I mean, inside, outside, right? Sort of looking at, I mean, even though Jenny Murphy can wave if we see her, you know, but there's a lot that can be when you're on the outside looking in, or you think about it from the student perspective, right? Mm-hmm. From the completer perspective, there's a lot that you can offer. So we're going to dive in, and just so we can preview for everybody who's here how this is going to work, we're going to talk about the learning, and Amanda will talk a little bit about the overall way that, you know, sort of the overall things, and then Kate is going to weigh in on how it played out at her institution. So before we go into that, I wanted to ask Amanda, just like generally, before I start the first, you know, how did institutions identify existing policy and practice obstacles? What was sort of the 101 that you recommended?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it is a bit of an iterative process. There's not just only one time where you're examining your policies and practices, but we actually put together what we've dubbed the Degree Reclamation Playbook that walks through sort of the step-by-step in a lot of the lessons. But we recommend that institutions inventory their institutional practices and policies, like sit down and write an inventory of them. Alongside doing data analysis to help demonstrate that need for change if you're going to be case making, and then communicating that need with the right stakeholders. So some of those policy and practice barriers identified things like fees for transcript requests, financial holds, unique institutional graduation requirements, those sorts of things. So you can get that inventory, and then as you're doing a deep dive through what we've called degree auditing, which is going through your records and figuring out who's close, and as you're talking to students, you can continue to uncover policies and practices that are obstacles, but that inventory is a really important first step.
Great. I appreciate that, and I appreciate we'll see what we can add in the follow-up so that everybody can forward that to their higher ed partners. And just to preview what's going to come, again, I said what was going to come next, but a little bit later, you all are going to be invited to think about the one thing you would do to change higher ed to make it more adult friendly. So just to keep that idea, that in mind. So there's inside, and there's the practice and the barriers, but this is really about students. And one of the things that most of you have in common is that you're working with adults or connected to adults who are trying to make that journey back. And so your voice really matters. So start thinking about that as you're hearing this conversation. So we're going to talk about sort of key elements. So we'll start with capacity, right? Sort of investing in capacity. This is one of the big recommendations that came out. So Amanda, what did you learn about institutional capacity through this work?
I think to harken back to one thing that Kate said, that this is the right thing to do, but it takes time. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes money. It is a considerable investment by the institution to prioritize this work. I think it requires capacity across things like leadership, technology, policy and practice, human capital, advising and student support, financial support, among other things. And so I think overall, one of the, I think, big takeaways for us, the step back, is that it's about recognizing why students stop out, what barriers exist around re-enrollment, and then doing the data work, investing in things like data capacity so that you can disaggregate, identify those barriers to student success, but then also look at those opportunities for change and use your data to identify students who can re-enroll. We know that systemic institutional change is going to be the longest lasting impact, and it's also the hardest. And so I really think that the institutions that have had the greatest ability to affect change through initiatives like Degrees When Due were ones who I think had that commitment to investing in capacity at all of those varieties of levels, and had really permission to be innovative with strategies to re-engage and re-enroll students. So I think you can't undersell the importance of investing in that capacity, specifically data capacity.
And generally, just as a follow-up to that, because I mean, there are deep realities to the way in which higher ed has been funded around infrastructure, particularly publics, in the last, particularly over the last 20 years, as we've seen a big disinvestment and more of the load being carried through tuition dollars, which of course is, anyway, not to go down that path, but have you seen, is accompanying those changes with grants from philanthropy or from other places? Has that been helpful? I mean, has that been a big part of what's enabled that? And I'll let Amanda answer that. And then Kate, you can talk about however you want to about the national perspective, but also how it's played out at Shasta. But
yeah, I think we've seen some impacts from investments through post-secondary focused philanthropy. We've also, as a result of this work, been really pushing for increased investment at the federal level in particular. That's one of our big policy takeaways at the national level is you've got to put money behind this. And especially as we're talking about investing in community colleges, which are disproportionately serving students who have been underserved by our post-secondary education system, they also have the least amount of money to work with. And so how can we better enable and better support institutions who are supporting and getting students hopefully across the finish line? How can we help them do their work better? And more money, specifically around these kinds of initiatives, is a game changer.
okay, thank you. Kate, please.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so interesting to think about. I think the most powerful thing was when I have allowed us to look at a framework for gathering data around the near completer. And anecdotally, we knew, folks were coming and going, but when we looked at our data around the amount of students that had completed 75% or more of the credits they needed to get a degree, and actually had completion course taking patterns, like they took math and English, they're working towards their transfer, they were in academic good standing, and they didn't complete. We are absolutely shocked. We are not a big institution comparatively, and our original data run was almost 5,000 students that had literally been one semester, if not one course, away from completion. And I think once we got that data, as my president said, it felt like a kick in the stomach. It's sort of everything from there. Business as usual could no longer be business as usual. So that having that data piece, and then the way Degrees When Due was set up is we actually started looking at the transcript of the folks that we lost to try to find patterns. And again, once we realized how hard that was, how the lack of automation. In California, we don't have any data sharing agreements. So English 1A over here is the same as English 1000, even though they're paid for by the state of California. And there's no way for those things to connect without actually doing this work by hand. So not only the lack of automation and how hard it was to do transcript analysis was another big aha. But then what we found by looking through those transcripts and the common three completely common buckets that we found that really became the low-hanging fruit. And that first bucket was just a lack of awareness of college procedures. Folks didn't know they had to graduate, petition to graduate. They didn't know that when they changed their major, they had to let somebody know in a formal way. So then if their transcript wasn't being evaluated, it was being evaluated against the correct thing. The timing for when we did transcript evaluation, we were doing in the last semester of the student's journey. So if we found something they were missing, it was too late. So the first was timelines and procedures. And the second big bucket was just really unclear curriculum. We required a computer information class that people just didn't know of. It was really confusing on what science of a lab was needed for what. So part of it was that curriculum piece. At that time, we were working on getting rid of remediation, but it was another curricular barrier. And the third piece was modality. So we worked with so many students that were balancing family and work, and they're like, we can't come on Monday and Wednesday from 1 to 3, and then Tuesday and Thursday from 9 to 10, and then tell our employers that it's going to switch and be completely different next time. So we weren't offering courses in the time that they could offer it. So it was procedures, it was curricular, and it was modality. And those buckets came out over and over and over and over again. And that was actually a pattern that Kaylee and I found when we were working with the California cohort. Same 3 buckets. So a lot of that became really actionable things that we could do right away. And also, again, that awareness of how many, the awareness of the common barriers, it created a motivating factor on our campus.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's sort of the same aha moment back in the day, and I'm sure across every community that's started a graduate program, right? Like we were just shocked at the number of people who had like overqualified for graduation, but never graduated, right? And the institutions just had no real way of tracking that. And for particularly if you've never, if it seems so obvious to colleges themselves, like, oh, our requirements are so obvious, but if somebody doesn't apply, haven't applied for graduation, or misses a deadline, or whatever that looks like, it's sort of a wake-up call when you're in the business of completion, right? When you're when your business is conferring degrees and you find out that people who have technically made it to the finish line aren't getting those degrees. That is certainly a big wake-up call. But speaking of which, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, Kate, was when you were talking about like schedule consistency, right? And I'm curious, I actually want to move to sort of meeting students where they are, right? Like what other things did you discover? And Amanda, I'll let you maybe speak first about whether there's some other things that sort of were big common themes across the cohorts.
Yeah, and I think when we sort of looking at the cohorts as a whole, there were lots of barriers that are and sometimes unique to returning adult students, but some that are faced broadly for students on campuses. And so things like financial challenges, family obligations, childcare needs, lack of transportation, health challenges, work demands, professional opportunities, like any one of those things, or particularly those things in combination, can really make continuing with higher ed seem impossible. And so when institutions are able to meet students where they are and devise their policies or rethink their policies that serve students better, frankly, it helps everyone. It's a win-win all around. And so those are some of the, I think, key themes, but would love to hear from Kate, other themes she heard at Shasta.
Absolutely. And particularly those things that you discovered that surprised you, sort of like.
Yeah, there's a couple that came to mind, Amanda, as you're talking about, because absolutely all students are going to have these barriers, but what we realized was our inability to support students when they are having those barriers. So what might be small became massive. So if somebody is working and is having an issue with financial aid and can't communicate with a financial aid person until after 5 and our office closes at 5, something that really could have been solved with a phone call is now something that seems insurmountable. And those are some of the changes that we've made that I'm sure we'll talk about later. I think the two massive surprises were just the amount of students that had actually earned a degree that didn't know it, or had earned, maybe they were going for an ADT, which is Associate's Degree for Transfer in California, and missed one course, so they didn't qualify for the ADT, but they would have qualified for the AS, so that they had these credentials. That was shocking. The other piece was how many students didn't understand that they needed to do a computer information course. And the amount of folks at the end of the curve, like, that's it, that's all I missed. And they were getting denied and didn't know it was just for this particular course. And when we dug in with that, we talked to folks, we reached out, and folks were like, I'm a working CIS professional. I didn't know I had to take Intro to CIS, or I took that before in a different format and I didn't know, which actually started the conversation around credit for prior learning. We went to Academic Senate and the Faculty Senate and said, this is a barrier. Is there another way we could think this? And their first step was absolutely, well, let's give them assessment for no charge if they want to take that. We created a credit for prior learning option, and then eventually they got rid of that expectation altogether. And then the other one was childcare. So we knew childcare was an issue, and if we asked people, childcare is an issue. And as we tried to solve that with further focus groups and interviews with students, it really wasn't childcare as much as us keep changing schedules, the lack of structured schedules. And they said, if I know I have Tuesdays and Thursdays for the next 2 years in the evenings, I can get somebody to cover that. What I can't do is have a schedule that's changing constantly, and I never can predict it. And then I keep asking family members to pick up here and there as I try to balance work. So we're trying to solve the wrong issue around childcare when it really was a modality issue. So that was a big surprise as well.
That's amazing. Now, you were doing all this work. I mean, just to sort of, jump a little bit, and then I'll let you circle back if there's something that I missed asking you, but you were doing all of this during COVID. So I'm just curious about, how did that impact your work?
That's such a great question. And actually we were cohort 1, so we were pre-COVID. And we really actually credit so much of our ability to be responsive in COVID because we had started this analysis, including things like students that can't get on our campus between 8 and 5 need to have a way to connect. We need to offer modalities that honor that folks might have kids or are working, and they can be offered a consistent way in a remote fashion. We developed a case management approach where we assigned folks per cohort so that student, and with different hours, the student knew who to call to be able to help them unpack things. So a lot of the conversations that happened pre-COVID allowed us to hit the ground running during COVID. And some of the work around modalities and 8 weeks semesters instead of that traditional 15 allowed us to say, okay, you need a break. Well, we're going to bother you, and we're going to get you back in this next cycle. So we are grateful that we had those conversations before COVID so that we could be a little bit more prepared for what, of course, was just something that no one really could prepare for. And in fact, when we first went to a fully remote campus, our team, because of our Degrees When Do work, and Buffy Tanner, who a lot of folks know, and some just great folks, we developed a program just for adult learners that had case management, that had more individualized support, that looked at transcripts. That group was actually called in to help the rest of the campus get ready for this new COVID thing.
It's amazing and really, really wonderful. What I want to do because we have this really exciting work ahead from the group, right, to give their insight sort of in a lightning way. I'm going to ask you and then Amanda, just in 3 areas that we think about. So we think about engagement, persistence and perseverance, and graduation. And just to ask each of you to go, I'll start with you, Kate, about what you did at Shasta, just sort of a highest impact single thing that you believe that you did in each of these areas. And then I'll go to Amanda. So for engagement, what did you do at Shasta that was this high impact, that you felt was high impact?
We definitely learned this from our peers. I think it was Detroit that said you can't invite adult learners back to the institution that didn't serve them well in the first place. And it was just embracing that theme. We just cannot say, oh, it didn't work for you last time, well, come on back. And I think, again, it was Detroit that says you've changed. So if we come on back and really working with folks and talk to them about what was the barrier, what was the goal, and how can we do it differently. A very easy thing that we did around re-engagement was recognize that if we did this outreach and say, come on back, we really want to care about you. And then they called our general number and it was like, push 1, push 2, push 4. They were like, done, so we created a whole separate communication plan for the folks that we were inviting back, because we were trying to win them back. And we realized that we just had one chance to do that. If not, they're going to go, you know what, you haven't changed at all. So
yeah. I'm sure that Kim's out there nodding to you about that. And then Amanda, just quickly, are there anything else that you thought was the biggest thing around engagement?
Yeah, I think for re-engagement, I want to double down on the importance of the degree audit, of doing the data work to figure out who it is that you're doing that outreach to. The data that we had coming out of Degrees When Due showed that nearly 1 in 10 completers contacted by their institution re-enrolled. I think in part due to some of the factors that Kate's talking about, but knowing who those folks are and having the data and outreach capacity on campus and investing in that is just critical.
Mm-hmm. That's very helpful. So very quickly on perseverance or persistence, just Kate, if you could share what you've done, that and graduation, what are the sort of one thing in each bucket that you thought was the biggest win?
Well, it's interesting because we learned so much from these students and our own processes that this conversation on why did we lose these folks, what do they need to bring them back, has opened our eyes to what these students bring back. And so we've now launched Credit for Prior Learning, and now we're doing competency-based ed. So it's looking at the student as a whole person with their whole body of work. So we've invested in case management and doing that transcript audit right up front as part of an interviewing process. Do you have industry rec certs? What have you done in your workplace that might apply? Bringing them in and embracing all that they've done up front to not only re-engage them, but to make sure that we're giving them the pathway they need to complete and not sending them towards something that maybe they had already achieved.
Thank you. It feels that sort of so fundamental, so obvious, but also so really hard to do, right?
Yeah, this was a very humbling process.
Yes, I'm sure.
Even as I said it, I'm just like, I can't believe we weren't doing that before.
Yeah.
So,
and then how about Amanda, for you, anything that you would add to that?
I would +1 everything that Kate said, and a lot of that comes down to being student-centered and having your policies and practices not geared toward the traditional student populations that working adult students and adult students broadly have different needs, and that we need to be adaptable to those. And so thinking about things like flexible course offerings, consistent scheduling options, credit for prior learning, all the things that Kate has talked about are so critical to creating that student-centered campus. And students need a sense of belonging. And so the student supports that they receive throughout their pathway and hopefully across the finish line can really stay attuned to the particular needs and concerns that returning adult students have. So that coming at the work from a place of equity and a place of keeping the student at the center.
Thank you.
And that's something I forgot to mention, and what our data really revealed is our low-income first-generation students and some of our equity populations, they were the first to hit a barrier and then say, you know what, this reinforces I wasn't college material, and they were more likely to then silently leave versus folks that felt empowered to trace, to really fight. So that's where that case management piece really came into play. And then the other thing I just really that's been such a motivator that I want to call out is in talking to the students and re-engaging, how many of the students put the blame of their lack of completion on their own shoulders, when clearly it was things that our institution could have done better, or the barriers that we put in place, and yet the individual took on those that responsibility. And when we reached out and we said, we realized we did this wrong, we realized that we could have done this better, allowing them to sort of put that burden down was both empowering, but also just really emotional about the responsibility that we have in serving students.
I so appreciate that. And we're gonna close this part of the session really because I mean, there is so much more to mine about this report and about this work. And I hope maybe you'll consider coming back, Kate, so we can talk more about this at some point in the future. I want to thank you for being here and I look forward to your engagement because we're going to move into the next session. And I really want you to be here for that. And maybe come back and comment on some of what our community talks about. And so thank you for that. And with Amanda, we're going to go into a next session because Amanda's expertise is in learning. So she learned, I have learned from what Kate and all of her peers did across the country, and has translated that into the kind of policy recommendations that she talked about earlier and the way that they're trying to build resources and other things to support higher ed. But now it's your turn, right? Now it's your turn to teach Amanda and to talk to Amanda about what it is that you've learned. And I think this is really important to know. So just to set this up, and in a moment, you're going to be doing some personal reflection. But some of you know the story, but many of you don't. But even if you have, you'll hear it again. When we had a shortage of college educated workers in the greater Philadelphia region 20 some years ago, the big solution was to recruit more traditional age students from around the world to matriculate locally and do things to increase their stay rate once they graduated. I mean, that was the solution. And you know, we started to look at this issue and it seemed like there might be another path. And so we asked what I think is a really important question, which is how might more Philadelphia residents enter the college labor market, and particularly those who had started, like 20% of all the adults over 25 in the US, but not yet earn their degree. So you might think that we went from that question just to like a whole service model. But that's not really what happened. What happened was we ran around and we talked to colleges about doing exactly what Kate talked about. Look at your stop out list, figure out, you know, what you can do in real time to keep adults there. Because the truth is that when you look at numbers like this, it's a system failure. It's not an individual failure. So we're really glad that it's being repaired at scale. So for the next session, we're going to ask you to think about what those systemic issues might be. So if you could wave, so again, I'm going to say this question again, you're going to see it in the chat. And for 3 minutes, I'm going to invite you all to reflect on this. If you could wave a magic wand and do just one thing to make all higher ed institutions, including your own if you're in higher ed, more supportive of adults, what would it be? And on the other side, we're going to work together to bring your ideas, big ideas to life. So is everybody with me? Thumbs up, 3 minutes. Misty's going to put some music on, put a screen up. We'll see you on the other side. So I want to invite, I'd like Amanda to take a moment, and maybe Kate can come up as well hold on, let me close this. And Kate can come up as well, I hope. And talk a little bit about these big ideas and sort of organize. Sorry about the different sizes. We can make them all the same. So Kate and Amanda. And I also want to invite, as we're doing that, if you have an observation or you would like to share on something discussed in your group, please use the reaction button to raise your hand. We would love to invite input. We don't want to put any of you on the spot, but we'd love to hear what you were thinking behind this. So, Kate, you're in a rural community. You said 10,000 square miles. Is that right? That's hard to. How big is 10,000 square miles?
That's such a great question. What is it? It's like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. There's an analogy there. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So better supports for rural adult students. I'm curious about what that means to you. And if the group that was talking about that, if somebody would like to add some context to that, we would be really grateful. So let us know with a little hand raise. Doug raised his hand. So let's spotlight Doug. Maybe he can say something about it, and then Kate can weigh in.
There may be a lag here, Sally. I was responding to the invitation that if you wanted to elaborate on what our
Ah.
group had discussed, not on your last question. So
Ah,
put me in abeyance till you get a response to the current question.
okay. Well, how about we do this? We've got a couple of people with hands raised. Matt has his hand raised and he's in Greater Spokane, but so I wonder maybe if he wants to respond to the rural question. So why don't we invite both Matt and then Doug to give their observations, and then I'll turn it back to Kate and Amanda for their observations if nobody else wants to share. So Matt, let's start with you.
So the rural support for rural adults did come out of our group. And that is something that is near to my heart in Spokane. So we're the biggest city between Seattle and Minneapolis, but outside of Spokane, the 7 counties that I serve, there's very few larger communities. We have a good network of Washington State University having extension offices in some of the bigger towns, but still somebody may have to drive, hour and a half, 2 hours just to get to one of those extension offices. And that puts them that far away from their childcare, that far away from their jobs, and just seeing what we can do in order to support those people getting back to school better. And also another problem with that is being that far out in the country, it is difficult to have quality internet.
Mhm.
Wow. And did that emerge a lot, Amanda, in the national discourse? Did those?
Absolutely. I think this idea of better supports for rural adult students, but I think some of those supports that you described, Matt, are applicable to adult students in other urban cities as well. So yes, that 100% resonates with what we heard through Degrees When Due.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you. Doug.
Okay, yes, I was in a group with Sina, and what we were trying to, I think, get across was that if you look at colleges or higher ed as delivering products, their adult products tend, based on the data, to not be very good. So what we really want them to do is to revisit their student support and learning delivery systems for adults, and redesign them based on input from adults.
Mhm.
And that the practice of simply taking some best practices and putting them on the traditional system that they've been using doesn't seem to drive numbers in a significant way. That you have to go back to basics and re-look at the system as a whole and determine whether in fact adults require a very different system of student support and learning delivery in order to be able to flourish and complete. And I don't think we got it across in our blurb.
No, we appreciate that. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to add or observe about what Doug and Sina worked on?
I think that sounds exactly right, and actually lends itself a lot to some of our equitable policy making principles work that we've done, which is you need to have folks who are impacted by your policies and practices at the table, and that the solutions need to be informed by those populations. And so that 100% resonates.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that. There are 2 things that I would just call out on here. And again, sort of reading these on the fly, and we'll observe them later. We'll sort of spend some time on these, but one is just something that I've heard over and over and over again. And that's because I learn a lot from Kim. So I don't know if it's what she put up there, but just the point of having a human being who's available on adult friendly hours. And I don't know if that was Kim's or not, but or if that one came out of there, it did not. So that's excellent. But I'm curious about how colleges address that, how has Shasta done that?
Yeah, it's such a great question. All of these are fabulous, and there's so much to speak to in all of them. Regarding our hours and recognizing adult friendly, we extended some counseling appointments. We We extended our financial aid offices. We offered more remote, but really it was that case management piece that I think really made a difference. Because sometimes if an adult is checking in from a workplace, they don't have 15 minutes to sit on hold or to track through. So sometimes our case manager, Janet, will actually track down that information for them, or they'll say, okay, great, Amanda, it sounds like you have some time on Friday afternoon. We're going to figure out if that answer, call back at this time. So just recognizing again that issue of that adults don't have the time to dig through, go from one office to another, or track down. And that really happens when they can talk to someone that can brainstorm with them at their schedule. And it saves time overall. A lot of these practices really make a difference overall. So become cost effective in the long run.
And that is that's super, that's really helpful. The other and it's important, right, to try to figure out how to make that work across all institutions. The other thing that's come up in a few of these, again, trying to read at the same time, but there's a lot about the language we use about adult learners. And this is something that we did way back in the beginning, which was we named the group comebackers. We stopped talking about people who had dropped out and more about people who had stopped out. And everybody uses different language. Michigan uses reconnectors, right? Everybody's got different language for this. I'm curious about Amanda, from your point of view or what you've seen, how did language play a part in the colleges in the Degrees When Due cohort?
Language is so important. I don't think, and I added the pink Post-it note on there because I feel really strongly about this, that I think that in addition to building in clear communication about like what it is returning adult students need to do to be able to cross that finish line, we can't be talking to them or talking about them in ways that make them feel that they don't belong, that reinforce that idea that college is not the right place for them, because that is not the message that is instructive or our goal. And so I love this suggestion a lot, and I think really resonates with some of the things that we heard from institutions.
Great. I'm going to call on Richard to come off mute in a moment. And have the final word here before we move to the next session. We're going to take down the Jamboard, but it is still live. So if there is anything that you feel that you've talked about that didn't get reflected on that, or if you want to revise your language or add a little bit to it, please do, because we will be working with this. Amanda and I are going to be spending time with this following this session, and it really does matter. So it is open for you now. So with that, Richard, I would invite you where do we go? There we go.
Thank you. And this is part of my dissertation that I'm finishing. So hopefully I'll be defending in the next handful of weeks. But really the idea here is this unwise business decision. So if I'm an enrollment manager, okay, at a 4-year institution that predominantly focuses on the high school pipeline, and I'm reading literature I'm learning about adult learners, and we talk about adult learners with the language that is used, they tend to have high attrition rates. They tend to go to a community college or technical education. They probably will not graduate from the institution they start. So all these stats, then if I'm an enrollment manager that I'm pressured to meet enrollment goals and I can meet those goals by going to a handful of high schools, then why would I go for adult learners? So that's kind of what I'm looking at, a perception and attitude towards adult learners. But I just wanted to place that out there on the importance of the language. And obviously I'm preaching to the choir. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. We're going to make that the quick last word. Where is Misty? Let's see. Misty, can you drop the evaluation in? We have a couple things to do in our last 3 minutes. Please stick with us. So for those of you who have been with us before, we always try to give you a few minutes during the session to do the evaluation. We really invite you to click on it now. It's very important to us. It's important to our partners who have spent time trying to put together the best possible experience for you. to hear from you and to get your perspective on this session. So we invite you to click through right now and finish that if you would for us. So we're going to give you a minute, and while you're doing that, so if you can do two things at once, we'll just give you a moment. And when you feel like my head is shaking in agreement with everything that's been said in this session. Thank you, Bob. If you could, along with Bob, add your praise and thanks to Amanda and Kate for not just being here with us today, which I'm very grateful for, but all of the time and energy they put in to helping to co-create this session. And of course, most importantly, all the amazing work that they're doing, because we are part of an ecosystem. The work that you do at the, in working directly, most of you working directly with adults, and your pieces, some of you are learners and contributing literature to the field. Some of you are, again, working directly with adults. Some of you are in higher ed, but every one of you is making a difference, because there isn't one answer, right? This is really tough. This is really complex. And we're we're taking bites of an elephant, like one nimble at a time. I wish that we could figure out how to take bigger bites. But I'm so grateful for all of you, for all of your contributions. And I thank you for finishing the evaluation. If we could take in our last 30 seconds, I think we have about 30 seconds left. If you could all just come off mute and please give Amanda and Kate like a huge round of applause and join me in thanking them. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it. It's so wonderful to see you all, and thank you for being with us for this session. We were super excited about it. We of course ran out of time. Someday we will figure out how to do all the things we want to do in 90 minutes, or we'll just give it up and make them longer. I don't know. But anyway, I'm grateful to all of you who came today. It was so good to see some longstanding friends I haven't seen in a while. So thank you for being here. And it was also always fun to meet new people. So thank you for those of you who came for the first time. Have a wonderful afternoon. We will see you soon, I hope.